What could roaming not allowed by server of SSH client mean? I'm failing to connect to an SSH server instance and the verbose output contains debug 1 column roaming not allowed by server. The following predictable and their avoidable problems arise. Roaming means to access services from different types of networks. I can't figure out what it could mean in the context of the verbose output of a SSH 6.6.1 client running on Ubuntu 14.04. It is not clear whether this is an error or not, and if it is, whether it is causing the failure of the login or not. I don't want to dive into the connection failure here, though. None of the output message of SSH does BTW and GT. More problems and time wasting. You have been warned. I queried site column www.opensh.org roaming in Google with empty result, and mem pages don't contain the term. It is nonsense to use it even if it was documented because of its ambiguity. What could the message mean? How could I use it to debug the large set of other highly ambiguous, unintuitive and unhelpful error and other messages of SSH?
It's not really an error message. It's just a debug message telling you that the server doesn't accept roaming connections. Roaming is apparently an experimental feature added to OpenSH back in 2009 or so. The purpose of the feature is to let an SSH client disconnect from a server session and then resume the session from another location. See here, archive.org, for some discussion about it. Googling SSH, roaming, and Martin Forsen will turn up other pages. It doesn't look like it's being actively developed. I suspect the SSH developers never documented it because it's experimental and perhaps not finished. From inspecting the OpenSH source code, there's an undocumented client-side option user roaming which can be set to yes or no. Adding the line user roaming node to your client configuration, normally your .ssh/config file, ought to suppress the debug message. It wasn't obvious to me why the server-side host-based authentication setting would control whether the server accepts roaming connections or not. Update: the client roaming support is apparently the subject of a computer vulnerability exposure report, 2016-0777. OpenSH versions 5.4 through 7.1p1 are vulnerable. Users should upgrade to OpenSH 7.1p2 or later. Users who cannot upgrade should disable roaming in the client by adding user roaming node to their SSH client configuration. See the following. This URL. This URL. This URL. This URL.
The changelog from OpenSH 5.3 on CentOS 6 has a note.
At ilmostro_7 chmod 600 authorized_keys work fine for me. For the benefit of anyone else who arrives here by googling roaming not allowed by server, and is using a Linux, Ubuntu, client, you might fix that warning and then see. The cure for that is given at this URL. #comment. U equals your username. Tippy tap, equals umo_ur. Equals press the enter key. I hope that helps somebody as much as this Q and AMP are already helped me.
This error message can show up when /etc/ssh/sshd_config doesn't have host-based authentication set to yes on the server. I have no idea why. Another issue may be: check the permissions on the $user/.ssh directory, which should be owned by the user and be chmod 700. The authorized _keys file should also be chmod 700 and owned by the user.
If you want to support this channel, please consider subscribing.